Hello everyone, I'm in the Eternal City. The central space of Rome, the heart of the empire, the most historic and symbolic part of the city for 1,000 years. The Roman Forum, an area of 2 hectares, plenty of ancient and iconic buildings from different periods in one place. Walk with me today through the history of ancient Rome. Let's go! The remains of the Temple of Saturn, one of the oldest sanctuaries in Rome. It dates back to around 500 BC, the period between the fall of the kingdom and the beginning of the Republic. What we can see today are only remains of the pronaos. The entire temple measured 22.5 meters in width and was 40 meters long. It, however, seems to be even larger due to the fact that it's located at the foot of the Palatine Hill. As Saturn was, among many other things, god of agriculture, which was the initial source of Rome's wealth, the temple served as the state treasury. When Caesar took power, he found 15,000 bars of gold, 30,000 bars of silver and 30 million sesterces. The temple also housed the 12 bronze tablets on which a set of laws were inscribed. They were created around 450 BC to ensure the equality of all Roman citizens before the law, regardless of their social status. The temple was rebuilt in the 4th century AD by the Senate and the people of Rome as inscribed on the architrave, but the podium of travertine and concrete dates back to its first reconstruction in 42 BC. 8 still standing Ionic columns measure 11 meters in height. 6 columns in front are made of grey and 2 on the sides of red granite. Another colossal monument in the Forum, 23 meters high and 25 meters wide, the Arch of Septimius Severus. Raised in 204 AD, it commemorates a victory over Parthians, modern Iran, by the Emperor Septimius Severus. The conflict between 2 nations began already in 54 BC. In 197 AD, Septimius conquered Parthian capital and 2 years later created a new Roman province, Mesopotamia. The dedicatory inscription hides an interesting secret. It states that the Senate and the people dedicated the arch to Severus and Caracalla on account of the restoration of the state and the extension of the empire, but 2 last letters on the 3rd and the entire 4th line were found to be covering the original erased text, which translates to Most Noble Caesar Geta, and replaced with To the Father of the Fatherland, to the best and bravest. The man behind this is Caracalla, son of Septimius, who according to his father's will was to rule with his brother Geta. Caracalla, however, didn't want to share the power and had his brother assassinated, his name erased from buildings and monuments. Here, the Roman soldiers are leading the prisoners of war wearing characteristic Phrygian caps. The core and foundation of the monument are made of travertine. The encasing and 8 columns, 4 on both sides, are made of Proconnesian marble. The arch was once topped with a gilded 6-horse chariot made of bronze, with Septimius riding in the middle. The triangle-shaped surfaces feature flying Victoria, the Romanized Nike, and smaller personifications of 4 seasons, here spring on the left and summer on the right. Curia Julia, the third chronologically House of Senate. Curia means meeting place. The first one, Curia Hostilia, was built here around the 7th century BC over the remains of a temple honoring the truce between Romans and Sabines, which almost right away began to be used by the senators advising the king. Curia Julia was commissioned in 44 BC by Julius Caesar and served chiefly as a senate house. Between the Curia and the Arch of Septimius Severus is a Lapis Niger, one of the oldest existing shrines in the Forum, which by some is believed to be a grave of mythical Romulus, the first king of Rome, but unfortunately it's covered due to the archaeological works.
Ancient Romans believed that Romulus, the first king of Rome, was buried somewhere here. It's actually unknown how he died, but the legend says that he disappeared in the whirlwind. One theory says that he was torn apart by the Senate. Another says that he was taken directly to heaven by his father, Mars, the god of war.
The legendary ruler of one of the Latin tribes in 753 BC established a settlement at the mouth of the Tiber River, where the trade route from the Etruscan north to the Greek south of Italy crossed. Rome's richer neighbors stood in the way of the city's development, as they didn't allow marriages between their women and Romans, at that time members of a poor, probably still a robber tribe. So Romulus organized the games, which the Sabines came to. The king of Rome ordered their women to be kidnapped and married to men of the best families. The so-called rape of the Sabines is the symbolic beginning of Rome's expansion, which continued for the next centuries. After the abduction of the Sabine woman, the battle between Romulus and Titus Statius, the king of Sabines, took place here in the swampy ground, no man's land, as the Romans were occupying the Palatine Hill and the Sabines the Quirinal. Before Sabine woman managed to intervene, the Sabine king's henchman, Mettus Curtius, died drowning in the swamp. This exact place wasn't drained up until the 1st century BC and was known as the Lacus Curtius, the Lake Curtius. The edge of the circular altar features a marble relief depicting this legendary Sabine warrior.
Can you imagine? Originally everything here between 2 hills were only marshy lakes. A great sewage project was initiated, Cloaca Maxima, and then in the beginning of the 7th century BC or a little later, the Roman Forum came to life.
Remains of the Basilica Aemilia, 100 by 30 meters, built in 179 BC. It got its name from the Aemilian family. Besides shops, the basilica housed the stalls for city bankers. It was also a meeting place of politicians and tax collectors. The next basilica, Basilica Julia, was named naturally after Julius Caesar, who commissioned its construction in 46 BC. It wasn't finished up until 12 BC. Nevertheless, 21 years later it burned, and during the centuries was rebuilt 3 times, in 12 AD by Augustus, in 199 by Septimius Severus, and 283 by Diocletian. Most of the buildings in the Forum we see, built of brick and tufa, were once covered with marble slabs. This allowed Romans to imitate Athenian architecture at a lower cost. White marble, local and readily available for Athenians, was expensive in Rome, hence the common practice of covering buildings with thin slabs of marble, which now decorate mainly Roman churches. The Temple of Vesta, one of the earliest structures in the Roman Forum, probably 7th century BC, but obviously it was renovated and rebuilt through centuries. It housed the eternal flame, which as ancients believed was the personifications of Vesta, the protectress of Roman people, goddess of the hearth, family and home. As long as the flame stays lit, Rome will enjoy prosperity and peace. Its uniqueness for Roman architecture, a round shape, was to symbolize either the primitive Roman huts or the earth crowned by the heavens. All temples to Vesta looked alike and featured doors on the east to emphasize the connection of two sources of life, fire and sun. We're in the House of Vestals, the most respected and powerful women in Rome. The first function of a Vestal priestess was believed to have been performed during the pre-Roman times by a virgin who inexplicably got pregnant with twins, mother of Remus and Romulus. The candidates for Vestals were chosen by the king or Pontifex Maximus, the high priest, when they were between 6 to 10 years old only. They had to take vows of chastity and perform their duties for 30 years, divided into 3 phases: learning, serving and teaching, each lasting 10 years. The priestesses wore long white robes, and under the veil their hair was braided into 6 or 7 braids, a hairstyle of Roman brides. Besides tending the sacred flame, they had to take part in many religious and state festivals, perform purification rites, and were also responsible for the preparation of mola salsa, salted flour, which was sprinkled over the sacrificial animals, altars, and thrown into the sacred fire. They also kept safe contracts, treasures, as well as testaments of the most important figures in Rome, like Julius Caesar, Mark Antony's, or Augustus. From the very beginning of their service, the Vestals had direct contact with the emperor, as he was the Pontifex Maximus. It was actually one of many privileges they enjoyed. They could leave and marry after their service. Unlike other women, they could testify in court, own property and other assets, and manage them as they saw fit. By the general public, they were perceived as holy beings, so they could pardon a prisoner by merely touching him, and anyone who would harm or insult a Vestal priestess in any way was sentenced to death. The punishment for their insubordination, however, was severe. A regular citizen for the extramarital relationship was at most penalized with the confiscation of property, but an unfaithful Vestal virgin, whose body symbolized the untouched city of Rome, was buried alive. She had to descend into the underground chamber with a little bread and water, and then the entrance was being sealed. Opposite the House of Vestals stands an imposing temple from the middle of the 2nd century AD. It was initially dedicated to Faustina the Elder, an empress, wife of the Emperor Antoninus. She was renowned for her wisdom and beauty. The temple was the first monument in the Forum dedicated to a female Roman citizen. The current condition of the temple, especially its longer side, lets us take a look at the Roman constructional solutions. These enormous tufa blocks were originally covered with marble. To lock the blocks in place more securely, Roman builders used iron pegs, which are long gone, as people in the Middle Ages hammered into the wall to get them out, and what they left behind? Much wider holes. 20 years after Faustina's death in 161 AD, Antoninus also passed away and, like his wife, entered the Roman pantheon. The temple was then dedicated anew by his successor, Mark Aurelius, hence its current name, the Temple of Antoninus and Faustina. Another interesting structure in the Forum. Three small rooms made of huge tufa blocks. For a long time it was believed to have been a carcer, a prison, or a house of ill repute, but modern scholars claim that these are remnants of a Roman house, most likely cellars or rooms of slaves. To the right stands a circular building which, on the base of an image on a coin, is believed to be a temple erected by the Emperor Maxentius in 307 AD for his son, who died at a young age of 14. After death, Valerius Romulus was naturally deified by his father. The most interesting feature of the building is its door, as it's original and surprisingly the lock still works after more than 1700 years. Remains of the Basilica of Maxentius. Its construction began in 308 AD and lasted only 4 years, but by then not Maxentius but Constantine I was the one responsible for completion of this magnificent project. It was built on the rectangular plan, 100 by 65 meters, and was divided into a central hall with a raised apse at the end and two lateral aisles. The monumental entrance was along the Via Sacra, an alteration made by Constantine. Initially, the entrance was to be located to the south. Let's try to imagine the sheer scale of the entire structure. It covered the area of around 5,600 square meters. These majestic three semicircular barrel vaults are remains of the side aisle and measure 24.5 meters in height, but the central nave was 10 meters higher, and its central apse featured a colossal statue of Constantine, which reached more than 12 meters in height. The basilica housed an office of the Praefectus Urbanus, prefect of the city, which was virtually the second person in Rome right after the emperor. The ceilings were covered in purple marble. The walls were covered in gilded bronze tiles, whereas the floor featured a geometrical pattern and was sheathed with polychrome marbles. 8 Corinthian columns, also made of marble, each almost 15 meters high and more than 5 meters in diameter, were adorning the main aisle, while the side niches were decorated with statues of gods. All who had the privilege of visiting the intact basilica must have been impressed, there's no doubt. It's the largest structure in the Roman Forum and the largest vaulted space built by the Romans. The uniqueness of the design results from the fact that this structure is actually a mixture of a typical Roman basilica, its layout, with elements from the public baths, vaults, arches and domes. What made it possible? The arches with coffers, which reduce the overall weight, and use of Roman famous construction technique opus testaceum, brick and tile faced concrete. Here's an example. I'm taking you now to the Terrazza Belvedere de Palatino on the Palatine Hill, where Rome was born, to show you the Forum from above. Here on the top we can admire the monumental remains of the so-called Domus Tiberiana. Although there is no certainty that it was erected by him, we know that it was the seat of his successors from the Julio-Claudian dynasty down to Nero. In fact, the word palace originates from the hill's name. The word forum is translated from Latin as marketplace, or explained as a place hedged about or fenced in, but most probably ancient Romans initially associated the word forum with the Latin verb ferre, to carry, which indicated that this was the spot where they could bring their goods to sell. At the eastern end of the Roman Forum, at the head of Via Sacra, stands a magnificent monument to the Flavian victory over Judea. In 70 AD, a year after Vespasian had become an emperor, his son Titus captured and destroyed Jerusalem during the devastating First Jewish-Roman War. On the over 15-meter high arch we read, "The Senate and people of Rome to Divus Titus, son of Divus Vespasian, Vespasian Augustus." Although the Jewish uprising was still going on, Masada fortress fell only in 73 AD. Already in 71, Titus had celebrated his massive triumph in Rome. Two large relief panels adorning the interior of the arch illustrate two moments of the triumph. Here we see Titus' triumphal chariot among the crowds. And above us, Titus sitting on the back of an eagle, joining the gods. The relief might have been added after his death in 81 AD. The most famous relief, the spoils panel showing the captured relics from the Jerusalem Temple, the menorah and the showbread table, sacred objects hitherto known only to the Jewish high priests, now put on a public display, parading through the streets of Rome. Titus destroyed the second temple in Jerusalem, took hundreds of Jewish prisoners, many of whom died in the imperial amphitheaters. Of course, above the arch we see two winged victorias. In 455 AD, the Vandals plundered Jerusalem's treasures. It was the invasions of the barbarians, first the Visigoths in 410 AD, and then the Vandals that devastated the Forum, and its downfall was sealed by an earthquake in the 9th century. The Middle Ages saw its gradual destruction. The Forum was a quarry for new building initiatives. Even in the 18th century, as Campo Vaccino, it served as a grazing and cattle market. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like and leave a comment to continue our journey through ancient sites. In the meantime, check out my other videos from Egypt, Greece and Turkey and join my Patreon community, link in the description. And see you on another ancient site.